Hi, I'm Morris Maloney from Alaska Arms LLC. In these videos I'm going to show how to properly install, adjust, and safety check our Model 70 style triggers for both the commercial and military 98 Mausers. Next thing I want to point out is this is a commercial cocking piece and this is a military cocking piece. They both work just fine in the trigger. Don't worry if yours looks a little different, it'll work just fine. And when we get into stoning, we'll be working on this very front corner right here, just to break that edge and to establish a contact surface for the sear. I'd like to go over the tools you need to install this trigger properly. First two items we have are a 50 thousandths and a 16th hex key. These are included with the trigger. The rest of the items are not included. You'll need to supply 3/32 punch to drive the pin in and out with, a small ball peen hammer, a set of calipers. You need two 5/16 wrenches, a small vise, and a fine grit stone. I use a 600 grit. Guess one. Let's go over the parts of the trigger here. Here we have the trigger pivot pin that goes into the trigger housing that anchors the trigger in place. Here's the trigger housing itself. This is the pin that pins the trigger to the receiver. Here we have the sear return spring. This is the sear. Here's the trigger return spring. The trigger, obviously. And this is the over travel adjustment here. So you're going to run that up to eliminate as much over travel as possible, and then you're going to set that lock nut right there. And that'll keep it in place. These two lock nuts here are run up against this spring, and that establishes your trigger pull. The next step here, we're going to do some measurements on the original cocking piece with the original bolt shroud in the original parts in place. This gives us an idea what we need to have to get the next trigger to work, the new trigger to work. At this point, it's very good to bring up some safety points. This is obviously just a receiver. If you have a barreled action, if you're dealing with a magazine box, take the magazine box off your gun. It doesn't need to be here for this. Verify the chamber is empty. Remove the ammunition from the area. You're going to be dry firing the gun as you do different steps. Absolutely no excuse to have any ammunition in the area. You will have a problem if you do. Be safe. Now, this is a 3-position military safety, obviously. That being in the fire position, here's the disassemble position of the safety, so you can strip down the bolt and open and close the bolt with the striker being locked. And then here's the safe position that actually locks the bolt handle down and prevents the gun from firing, locks the striker back. The 3-position Model 70 style safety has the same 3 positions, but they're on the side that pivots forward and back. So, not rocket science here. We just need to take our measurements from a different area. From the same point, we can make all 3 measurements on the bolt shroud, from the striker to the bolt shroud, and get a good accurate number. So it doesn't matter what point you have to work from, as long as you use the same point for your measurements. So we'll take the first measurement here and just record that number, which is 671. And then I'm going to put it in the safe position. Now it must pull the striker back off the sear. If it doesn't, it allows you to, when you pull the trigger, the striker will fall and out will sit on the safety. And then when you put it in a fire position, it will now discharge because the trigger cannot recock. So it absolutely must retract the striker. So let's see what number we have now. We had 671. And right now we're at 702. So that's 31 more thousandths. That it's pulled it back 31 thousandths, a 32nd of an inch. Now let's put it in the full safe position. And our original number was 671, and there's 705. So that retracted it to 34 thousandths. So we know we're a good 30 seconds off of that sear, and that's absolutely critical. You're going to find a minimum of 15 thousandths just to be safe. And some of the military safeties that I've checked have been up to 60 thousandths, 70 thousandths. So don't be alarmed if it retracts it quite a bit. In your Model 70 styles, you're going to be running 15 to 25 thousandths, and that's fine, but it must pull it back. That's critical. The next step is to remove the original trigger and remove the bolt. So to remove the bolt, we're going to put it in the safety in the disassemble position. Remove that, and before we get into this any farther, I want to take the new sear and pull that against the bolt, and you can see where it contacts the edge of the cocking piece. That edge just needs to be broken so it slides smoothly over that surface. just a very slight break. That's your starting point. You can always break it more. It's really hard to put it back on and start all over again. So be really judicious here. Just take a little bit off and be kind of careful with that and go slowly. Okay, let's get this trigger out of the way. Okay, before we pull the punch out, because now we've driven out the pin, we're going to hold the trigger in place. That way the spring doesn't come flying out. Either we'll lose it or hurt somebody. We don't need to do either one of those. So there we go. It's out of there safely. And now we're ready to put on the trigger housing and the sear. Just a quick note, there's a set screw right here that locks the trigger housing in place and gives a good secure setup. So we're going to be reaching through the bottom of the sear to do that. This pin, you will already have ground to length if you need to take a little bit off for your stock. If not, you may want to revisit that and see if you need to do that or not. So to start out, I'm going to put the sear pin in there, put the sear spring in, and then I'm going to put the sear in place in the housing. Slide it over the little boss in the bottom of the receiver. Just tap that in place. You can see that works just fine. Now we're ready to put the trigger in place. Now I've backed off the over travel adjustment, backed off all the lock nuts. Just need to slide the trigger spring in place. Put that where it goes. And slide the trigger pin in place. Now, do not ever use Loctite on your trigger. It will run inside and it will lock it up. And it will make it very unsafe and you'll be very disappointed with the results. Put a little drop of DevCon or JB Weld just right there on the edge of the pins if you're worried about them. And go about your business, and that'll be good for the rest of your life. I'm going to put this 50 thousandths hex key through in here. I'm going to find the head of the lock screw, which goes right to it. I'm going to just snug that up. So that's tight now. That's a done deal. You've now installed your trigger, and now you get down to the adjustment phase. Next thing we want to check, we want to make sure that the striker nut is coming back. So we can see just visually that it's coming back. It's being retracted off of that, and this just follows and verifies what we found down here with the trigger sear. But that's really not good enough. You must measure it. And we had our numbers the first time, and we knew that it was retracting it an additional 31 and 33 thousandths. So let's see what we have this time. There's 672, and that's the first, that's the disassembled position. And so we have 695, which gives us 23 thousandths. And here's the full safe position. And there's 697, which gives us 25 thousandths. So that's between the 15 and 25 thousandths that we want to have the safety retract the striker nut. From the fire position to the disassemble position to the full safe position. You can see from the numbers that we have and the way the trigger's functioning that everything's working properly and that this is a safe installation. They always don't work out this way and you have to make some adjustments. So here's where you make those adjustments. If the gun dry fires when you go from a safe to a fire position after you pull the trigger, and the check would be you'd put the safety on, you'd pull the trigger, and then you take the safety off. If the gun dry fires, that tells you right there you've got to take more off of this point right here. And that also you would have found that much sooner when you made your measurements and when you did the visual checks. But that tells you you've got to remove some more material right there from that edge that you stoned to begin with, that contact surface. And don't take a lot off. Be very judicious. Just a little bit at a time. Check it. It's hard to put it back on. Okay. That said, now we're going to go on to the next problem that we have occasionally. Is you've made your adjustments and now your safety does not want to engage anymore. And here's a classic example of that. Is this was a military safety, probably made late in the war, and it's very square on this corner here. And so as it moved forward, by stoning this corner, the striker nut moves forward up to the sear, the new sear position. And now it's difficult to engage the safety, so you'll need to just stone a bevel across the top of that. This is where the military safety engages. If, on the other hand, you have a standard 3-position Model 70 safety, and there's some beautiful safeties out there for these guns, it's going to contact here on the side. Know where your safety is going to contact and increase the bevel in those areas if it's indicated. And then being indicated means you can't put the safety on at all. If you go too much and it doesn't retract enough, okay, then you're back to stoning this corner right here and working that down ever so slightly. This is the last step of the assembly, and then after the assembly is complete, then we'll just worry about adjustment. So that'll conclude this video. But before we do, we need to put the safety in the disassembly position and remove the bolt. Now we're going to remove the striker assembly and the bolt shroud. Take the cocking piece off. This is the edge I pointed out earlier that is going to contact the trigger sear. And that's the edge we're just going to stone and break the edge up on. Very, very easily break that. That's a 60-degree angle on the trigger, but it does pivot, so it doesn't have to be exactly 60, but we would like to have a nice smooth surface there. So you can file it. Usually the file don't have the teeth all the way to the end, so that kind of slows you down a little bit. But we just want to barely break that edge. We don't want to have a sharp corner. It won't dig into the sear because it's heat treated. It's really hard, so it's not going to be a problem there, but it'll just slide a little smoother. So we just put a little bevel on there. Okay, there we are. We're going to reassemble that. Okay, and put that in there. Alright, and there's a quick visual check we want to do. Is now we have the safety in the fire position. So now we're going to put it in the disassemble position, and we see that as we do that, the sear is pulled back off the trigger notch. And that shows us that the safety is functioning properly. That's just an easy check. Measure it to make sure and see how much, but we can see right now it's working. And we can put it on safe. If you can't put it on safe, then we have to make some other adjustments, and that will get into the adjustment section. And that concludes the assembly part of this video. Okay, here's a close-up of what we just showed there. And I'm going to rotate the safety from the fire into the disassemble position, and you're going to notice that the sear rotates back off of the trigger notch, and that's what I'm talking about. And now when you put it in the safe position, the full safe position, it's still back off that trigger notch. That's critical. That tells you that it's working properly. Now you need to measure it and verify how much. Now we'll move on to the adjustment part of this video. These triggers must be installed, adjusted, and have the safety check performed by a competent gunsmith that's fully familiar with their function. The videos are intended only for my triggers, and that being the Winchester Model 70 style triggers for both the commercial and military Mausers. For more information, you can contact me at my website, which is AlaskaArmsLLC.com.